alarise.org anytime to find out more, to join Arise, to join us, to join this group in the work that we do. This session, if you need closed captioning, that is also available for this session. And if there are some other issues that come up, you can always dial the Arise office. Juliet is our tech person. Thank you, Juliet. And if necessary, she can maybe help with some tech support if you can't quite figure it out. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to pass it off to Mike, who's just going to lay out a few more of the preliminaries before we get into the meat of the discussion. And we do have others who are continuing to join us as we go along. So thank you all so much for being here. And Mike, I will roll it over to you.
Thanks, Press. Just a couple of things to keep in mind as we do our business today. I know that everybody's probably pretty used to Zoom calls by now, but it's just a nice reminder to keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking. That way everybody's attention can be focused on the speaker. This event is an opportunity for those who normally don't ask questions to maybe ask some questions. And if you find that you've already asked a couple of questions, maybe take a step back and make sure you leave the time and space for other folks to get their questions in as well. We're all doing our best during difficult times. We always try to give folks grace, and we hope that you'll offer us the same. Some of the staff at Arise here have children, so it's possible, probably even likely, that they may make an audible or even a visual appearance. So please have some patience with that. We're all working around our families here. So just a quick overview of what we're doing tonight. We're going to start with a legislative overview of the past session with the wonderful David Stout. Then Dev and Jim are going to give us tribute to our victories, and we're going to mourn some of the more disappointing things that happened. After that, Debbie and David are going to have a little discussion to talk about the road ahead, what that's going to look like. We'll have a Q&A chat to answer any questions that y'all might have. Please feel free to put those questions that you have in the chat, and we'll try to get to those in the order that we receive them. And then finally, Stan's going to wrap up the session with some action items and some steps that we can take going forward. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to David for the legislative overview. You're muted, David.
I hope that proves we're tired. And for everybody that's listening, most of the staff is tired because we were up to midnight last night. So if I stumble a little bit or sound a little bit crazy, you'll know why. But it's been a most unusual session in that we almost had no access. In fact, the public had very little access. And just so you'll know, the only way you could get to the State House to meet someone, you had to make an appointment. You had to go through security, had to say where you were going, and you would go meet. The longest meetings you were supposed to have was 15 minutes with House members. It was a little bit more lax in the Senate. So we had little access. They were very strict. Traditionally, you could watch it live or go to the galleries of both bodies and watch action, and you could not even do that. So what happened was we were all relegated primarily to monitor the session by video, which presented its own problems. You could only go in person to a committee meeting in the House if you were presenting at a public hearing, and our executive director, Robin, did that a couple of times. And with the COVID problems, then it just became increasingly difficult to do that. So what it really meant was that we had less access than we ever had. And even in the process of monitoring the session, often the video would freeze or the sound would go off, or legislators would forget to turn on their microphones. So all of that to say basically that it was a very difficult session monitoring, having input, and being able to influence legislation. I told a little story this morning. We had a meeting with Arthur Orr, who's the chair of the ATF, the General Fund Education Committee in the Senate. And after we met with him, we went out in the hall, and I saw a senator that I knew, and I yelled at them and went down and grabbed him and we talked to him, very friendly conversation. We came back up the hall. I saw a couple of more folks that we talked to. And the next morning when I came to the State House for another meeting, the security people jumped on me for breaking the rules. So I just tell you that story to just show you how strict it was. And many of you participated in Legislative Day, where Arise flooded the State House with a lot of good publicity and a lot of good contact, but those days were not available this time. Generally, I would say the session was only semi-productive. Of course, both budgets did pass, and they passed with extra money. So it's surprising, but the state is in pretty good financial conditions. The Senate, if I told the truth, performed very little activities. I would say in most cases, they only stayed in 2 hours a day. The House wound up being the deliberative body to discuss and to debate issues more than the Senate. So it was kind of topsy-turvy in the way it operated. So I guess if I could say it in 2 sentences, number one, it was hard to access. It was important what you did to call legislators or call the governor's office or to write them a letter or to get other people to call and write. That's very important. And lastly, a few good things passed and a lot of bad things died. So it's one of those unusual years, and hopefully that it will get better in the future and we'll have more access and be able to have greater input in the future. And with that, I'm going to defer to Dev and Jim to tell us the good things and the bad things that occurred.
Jim, you're on mute.
So sorry. Thank you, David. And I am Jim Carnes. I'm Policy Director at Arise. And I want to join in thanking everyone for coming out tonight at supper time. As David said, we have some things to celebrate from this session. Your advocacy has really made a difference on Arise's priority issues. I'm going to highlight positive developments in broadband and healthcare, as well as some successful defensive work in healthcare. Defensive work is just as important as proactive work, and civil liberties and racial equity. Then Dev Wakely will walk us through 2 very active issues, criminal justice reform and voting rights. Broadband access was a new issue for Arise this year. Lawmakers passed Senate Bill 215 by Senator Marsh to establish a broadband authority that will govern the expansion of this utility. Going forward, Arise's advocacy will focus on ensuring equitable broadband access, including maximizing the abundant federal funds that are rolling in for broadband to serve hard to reach and underserved communities, and bringing community voices into the broadband expansion policymaking and implementation. That's where the rubber really meets the road on the access question. As I'm sure y'all have noticed, a number of conservative states followed a script this year in their legislatures, reacting against 2 things: against COVID restrictions and against the racial justice protests that we saw in the summer. I'm happy to report that Alabama did not follow suit, and advocates deserve a lot of credit for that. In fact, we actually made some progress, especially on the public health front. The legislature passed House Bill 210 by Representative Lee to establish a statewide hospital database that will greatly enhance our ability to identify and address racial health disparities. Before this bill passed, Alabama was one of just 2 states, along with Idaho, that have not yet had this statewide hospital database. And this is going to be just a very significant tool for our work going forward. In line with that national trend I mentioned, we did see a wave of bills aimed at limiting the authority of the governor, the state health officer, and county health officials to protect Alabamians by means of health emergency declarations and other emergency measures. We even saw a major bill from a powerful senator, Senator McClendon, that would have restructured and politicized the entire Department of Public Health. I know that you saw repeated action alerts from Arise on Senate Bill 240, McClendon's bill, and other public health preemption bills, as we've been calling them. And I want to thank you for responding to them at every step along the way. In the first committee, the first chamber, the second committee, the second chamber, we managed to block all of these bills. The last stand came on the last night when Senate Bill 97 by Senator Watley, another powerful senator, failed to clear the procedural vote called the BIR. Some of y'all will be familiar with the budget isolation resolution that has to pass with a higher majority until the budgets have been transmitted to the governor. So it's sort of a hurdle that bills have to get over. This bill failed to get its BIR, but then later in the evening, when the general fund budget had gone to the governor and there was no longer that hurdle in place, the House brought back a new calendar and SB 97 was at the top of the list. And we were really afraid that with that lower bar in place, that bill might have passed, but time was on our side. And the speaker took his time before getting to that new calendar. And in the end, the clock struck midnight before they brought that calendar up. So that bill failed. And thanks to your strong message of opposition, our legislative allies held the line on that bill and it did not come back up. A few health-related bills that we supported did die along the way, as David mentioned. And of those, I would highlight one, HB 431 by Representative Hall, which would have extended Medicaid postpartum coverage for new mothers to a full year. There was also a bill to expand Medicaid, HB 432 by Mary Moore, but we did not support that bill because we think our best path to Medicaid expansion does not go through the legislature, as Debbie will explain a little later. On the civil liberties and racial justice fronts, I just want to celebrate that we were able to block HB 445 by Representative Treadaway, the so-called riot bill that would have severely limited the right to assemble and protest. And we also defeated HB 242 by Representative Holmes, an attempt to make the Confederate Memorial Preservation Law of 2017 even more restrictive for communities. So both of those are examples of the strong advocacy that it takes to fend off harmful legislation. And I thank you for your advocacy on that. Now I'm going to pass to policy analyst Deb Wakely for an update on how criminal justice reform and voting rights fared in the 21 session. Deb?
Hi, everybody. We have got some wins to celebrate from this session on criminal justice and so some defensive work on voting rights. I'd like to start off by talking about SB 210 by Senator Arthur Orr. Now, this is a bill that improves the state's civil asset forfeiture system. SB 210 started off a couple of years ago. Senator Orr has been working with this bill for a while, trying to get it passed in a comprehensive ban of civil asset forfeiture form. We're not there yet. 2 years ago, Senator Orr was able to get this bill passed, or a version of a reform passed that required data reporting. But ALEA, the law enforcement lobby, was really reluctant and basically stonewalled implementation of those reporting requirements. So this year, Senator Orr came back with SB 210, which, as originally introduced, would have completely eliminated the procedure of civil asset forfeiture. It would have required a criminal conviction for any forfeiture. That's what we think of as the gold standard. But to move this bill, Senator Orr had to dial it back a little bit. And in the end, the bill passed yesterday, unanimously, surprisingly. And as enacted, as passed by the legislature, it will significantly reduce the number of people who are subject to forfeiture. And it will target the people whose forfeitures were for less money and for less valuable property, the people who were hit hardest by losing their money and property. It's a great step forward. It's a huge step forward. I think we probably sent out I think 6 action alerts on this in some shape or form, along with its House companion bill that was sponsored by Representative Sorrell. But it is now passed. It's a major step forward, and it'll go a long way toward as a springboard for a complete elimination of this practice. We're not intending to stop here with this. We think we can do a lot more, and this is a huge first step that'll help a lot of people and really prevent a lot of financial devastation toward the least well-off people in Alabama. I'd like to move on to another victory here, which was HB 106, sponsored by Representative England. This bill would expand data reporting requirements, or implement data reporting requirements that require the Department of Corrections to basically open up their books to the legislature. A lot of what we see problem-wise is because of opacity and refusal to give the overseeing body in the legislature enough and the necessary data to correctly oversee the problems in the Department of Corrections. This bill is really kind of foundational to a lot of future reforms. When we have the data, we'll be able to make a lot stronger cases in a lot more direct manner and show exactly and how extreme the shortcomings are of the state's criminal justice system. This bill will help us a lot in the long run in implementing some of our other reforms, specifically some of these sentencing reforms. And we will need that assistance from this data, because a lot of the sentencing reforms, while they moved, didn't quite make it into law. And that included a number of sentencing reforms that were endorsed by Governor Ivey's Criminal Justice Commission last year. Well, I guess 2 years ago, technically. So we're dealing with a state prison system that is an atrocity, and a federal government that has recognized this and has sued the state. And even so, the legislature has been really reluctant to move a lot of bills, reluctant to completely pass the majority of these reforms, and reluctant to even move some of the broader system-wide reforms that we really think that we know to be necessary, because they'd alleviate the overcrowding and keep people out of prison who shouldn't be there in the first place. So there's what I call like the criminal justice suite of bills that came from the governor's task force, and those bills included, and a lot of these bills were carried by Representative Jim Hill, and some of them were carried and expanded on by Representative Chris England. Representative Hill carried bills to allow petitions for resentencing under certain provisions of the HFOA, and that bill moved a lot, but it didn't quite get there. And Representative Hill carried another bill to implement community corrections programs in every single judicial circuit in the state of Alabama. Most judicial circuits have them, some don't. That bill moved, again, one step shy of passage. But it didn't quite get there. It will, I think, and we had a great response to our action alerts that helped move it as far as it did get. But some of the broader reforms, like a complete repeal of the Habitual Felony Offender Act, which is necessary because its mandatory minimum laws are horrific, didn't move at all. That bill was pretty well stonewalled in the House Judiciary Committee. It was sent to subcommittee. Representative England worked hard to get it out of there. Eventually, it got out of the committee. I think as sort of a gesture of respect on the part of Chairman Hill to Representative England, but it didn't get passed, and it was pretty far from passage. Additionally, one of the criminal justice debt related bills that we were hoping would pass didn't get there either yet. That's HB 129 by Representative Pringle. It had great support in committee, and y'all did a wonderful job of reaching out to your legislators on the House Judiciary Committee. Anytime I would be able to get a hold of them, like David mentioned, reaching folks was pretty difficult this year. They knew full well that y'all had been contacting them. They were fully aware of it, and most of them supported this bill. But again, the law enforcement lobby was able to stonewall Representative Pringle on that. We're going to get there on that bill. It has the support of the majority of the House. I think his votes are there, and I think he knows it. But we've just got to get it. We've got to get the procedure down, and we will get there with the added pressure next year. So we see a lot of criminal justice bills that have moved, and have moved significantly. A lot of them have passed the House of Origin. A lot of those Hill bills and even some of the Chris England bills have moved significantly. And we just have to keep pushing on those to make full final progress and get what we're after. On voting rights, we have done much better playing defense than offense. We saw a lot of bills that would improve the voting rights systems in the state not move at all. And we saw some of them actively sabotaged by people who were supposed to be allies. Really, one of the areas where we thought we'd see a little bit of progress was on no cause absentee voting, and there was cross-party support from Secretary Merrill stating that he would support that bill until he ran into opposition from his own party and basically gave up at the first sign of any significant blowback. He threw Representative Hall under the bus, and that bill, HB 396, then stopped moving. There were several iterations of the no cause absentee voting bill, one by Representative Jackson and one by Senator Smitherman. All of those other ones didn't move at all. Representative Hall's was the only one to really gain traction. But a lot of bad voting rights bills didn't make it either. We are not Georgia, thankfully, this year, because their omnibus anti-voter bill, nothing approaching that level of horror got any sort of traction. I will say that unfortunately on the last night, the Senate clotured that they voted to end debate on a filibuster that was led by Senator Singleton and Smitherman, and implemented a ban on curbside voting. And that is a really unfortunate development that will result in litigation that the state should certainly lose because of access to folks with disabilities and how that affects them as voters. That's an unfortunate way to end the night and the session, but overall, a lot of the worst excesses were completely nipped in the bud. Attempts to undercut the state executive officials' authority and try to make them go to the legislature to deal with states of emergency as they affect voting. A lot of those were I won't say completely shut down, because some of them did move a little bit, but overall we didn't see anywhere near the damage, and we're able to stop a lot of that. in voting rights. So we've got a couple of major victories in the criminal justice reform area, and some significant defensive work that really helped keep Alabama from becoming an example of what not to do in the same way that some of our other neighboring states did this year. And thank y'all for that. The public pressure is really what prevented a lot of those voting rights bills from moving farther than they did. Oh, sorry, I actually closed out of the agenda. My bad.
Yeah, you can. Thank you, Deb. You can pass over to
pass it back
Debbie
to
and
Debbie.
David.
Back to Debbie and David then.
Okay. Thank you so much, Deb, for that update. Appreciate it. And thank you to all of y'all for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm Debbie Smith, and I'm the Northeast Alabama organizer for Arise, and I'm also working on the grassroots campaign for Cover Alabama, our Medicaid expansion campaign, which is why I'm giving you the update on Medicaid expansion tonight. So I have some good news. We've come a long way, you guys, on Medicaid expansion. We've come a really long way. I'm sure y'all remember way back when the option was available to expand Medicaid, that the conversation was just, oh, heck no, we ain't doing anything that's associated with Obama or Obamacare, right? Like, there's no way we're touching that, right? So we had a few years of that while he was still in office and everything. And then when he left office, it was like, oh, okay, all right, well, you know, like rural hospitals are closing and all these bad things are happening. And so we know Medicaid expansion could help that, but oh my gosh, but can we pay for it? So the excuse was always, you go to speak to your legislator about it, it'd be like, oh, well, gosh, you know, it's just too expensive. I don't know how we're going to pay for it, right? So our mission has been, let's get some dollars for it, right? And so we hired Jane Addams last summer to do a campaign just for Medicaid expansion. And she has brought this campaign forward so much, right? She's a former DC lobbyist and an Alabamian. So that great combination has really moved us a little bit forward on the Medicaid expansion campaign. So back to how do we pay for it? Well, back earlier this year when we were doing the COVID relief package, Jane and the Cover Alabama campaign and the Southerners for Medicaid expansion saw an opportunity to get some funding for states that hadn't expanded Medicaid yet. Because a lot of the states that just, same situation, they were hearing like, oh gosh, it was just too expensive for the first few years of Medicaid expansion. So maybe if we could get some sort of more federal incentive than what we already have, then maybe that could push the holdout states over the line. So happy to say that Jane and you all, I know there were some sign-on letters and stuff that Alabama Arise folks signed on to try and get a federal incentive for Medicaid expansion. And so happy to report that there was a federal incentive included in the American Rescue Plan that happened earlier this year, right? And that resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars of potential funding if we expand Medicaid. And that could potentially cover at least the first 3 years of Medicaid expansion, possibly more. We think it looks really good. And it would also create a lot of breathing room in the general fund budget. So just good things all around. So that offer has been on the table for a couple of months now. And we've heard really good things from Governor Ivey's office, and we've heard good things from some Republican legislators even, who are starting to say, oh, well, this is a really good deal that we just can't turn down. So, but we still need to like push it over the line. It still has just a little bit that we need to get over. We've heard that that Governor Ivey, she wants to, but she's still just like a little bit hesitant. We need to make her feel comfortable that if she steps out and if she uses her executive authority, because that's what we want to do, is we want Governor Ivey to use her executive authority to tell the Medicaid administration to expand Medicaid rather than going through the legislature. That's always been our plan. So we want to tell her to expand Medicaid. And we just want to make her feel comfortable enough to do it and make her feel like it won't be the end of the world if it happens and that Republicans won't go after her, right? So one of the ways that we can make her feel comfortable about that is by letting her know just how many of us there are out there that actually support Medicaid expansion. And so I have a great opportunity for y'all to do that. This Thursday, we are having a call-in day for Cover Alabama. We're trying to do 1,000 calls to Governor Ivey. I know it's a lofty goal, but I think we can do it. We sent her over 1,000 emails earlier this year. And so I think we can translate that to phone calls. Really, guys, we're using a patch-through phone system. I think Juliet is dropping that into the chat. Yes, the call-in day to Governor Ivey. That's in the chat. You can use that link, and we'll send it out later as well, to do the call-in. It's a patch-through system. So what will happen is you'll put in your name, your zip code, your address, and then your phone number. And then once you hit the enter in your information, then you'll get a phone call that will actually patch you through. So you'll pick it up and it'll be Jane, our campaign director, and she'll tell you everything that's going to happen. She'll say, hey, you need to call Governor Ivey's office, and this is exactly what you need to say to her. And then when you're ready, press this button and we'll patch you through. So it'll actually connect you with Governor Ivey's office right then and there. And we'll have a script for you and everything. So it's super simple. I did it a couple of days ago. It went fine. Governor Ivey's office, they're really nice. So if you have any hesitancy about calling, I know it can be a little scary sometimes, but please don't be scared and make the phone call. And make sure that you use the link that we're giving you tonight, if you can, because that way we can actually track how many phone calls that we make on that day. So we'll know whether or not we actually hit 1,000 phone calls, but we really want to blow up her phone. So please save the date, just in 2 days, on this Thursday, and call Governor Ivey and ask her to expand Medicaid. Another opportunity that we have are some sign-on letters for folks. We've already released a couple of sign-on letters that you may have seen. We had a bunch of medical professionals sign on to a letter of support, over 300, and I know some of you shared that, so I really appreciate that. We also had around 278 faith leaders from across the state of Alabama say that they supported Medicaid expansion through a sign-on letter. And again, I know some of y'all are even on this call, so I'm really, really thankful that you signed on for that, and we shared that a few weeks ago. But we have a couple more sign-on letters that we're hoping that you all can share. And I think Prez is going to, or Juliet's going to put those links in the chat, and Prez is going to send out the links after this call. But there's one for individual business leaders. So anybody who considers themselves a business leader that supports Medicaid expansion, we would like for them to sign on to this letter. And we also have one for law enforcement officials. So any police officers or sheriffs that you know that might support Medicaid expansion, please share this sign-on letter with them to sign on and show that they support Medicaid. A special note on the law enforcement one is that with the medical and the faith and the business ones, you know, we have publicized those. We've put those on our websites with all the signatures and stuff like that. With the law enforcement, we're going to keep that private, and that'll just go to Governor Ivey. So if that's a concern when you're sharing it with folks, let them know that. Okay. The only other note I would have is that we are still, the Cover Alabama Coalition is still accepting member groups, and it's still growing. I think we started out with like somewhere around 50 groups in April of 2020, and now we're up to over 100 groups from across the state of Alabama that have joined the Cover Alabama Coalition. So if you are interested in signing on and becoming a coalition member, it's free. Then send me an email, let me know, and I'll get you the details. All right. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to David, and he's going to tell you about the future landscape and what y'all can do over the next few months.
Well, it looks tough. The landscape looks like it's rough. First of all, let me tell you that the governor's got 9 days left to sign bills. So some of the bills that we are interested in being signed are on her desk. So the way that works is she has to sign those bills. If she does not, they're automatically vetoed. So that's just something that you need to know. The way the future looks is a lot of complications, and I will just try to tell you what those are. One of the complications is unfinished business. Unfinished business means those things that the legislature did not, for one reason or another, accomplish. So what that means is there's a possibility of special sessions. Special sessions can last 10 days over a 30-day period. Now, the specials that could be on the horizon would be prisons. As we know, the financing for the prisons, private prisons, has gone away. And so there may be a special on prisons. There may be a special on gambling. You know, the governor seemed to be wholeheartedly engaged in trying to get a public vote on a large gambling package. And of course, it failed in the House. It failed in the House because there were a lot of people in the House who wanted to be sure that Medicaid expansion was part of the revenue that would come out of gambling. So it failed. So there may be a special on gambling. There has to be a special on reapportionment. Every 10 years after the census, the legislature has to reapportion those districts, the Senate and House districts, school board districts, and congressional districts based on population. That's going to be tough because the numbers to finalize reapportionment won't come until early fall. And so there will be a special session on that in the fall to determine the new districts that people will vote on, or the districts that people will be elected to next year. That means it even gets more complicated because the session in election year begins in January. So if you can imagine the possibility of 2 to 3 special sessions followed by a regular session in January, you just know how complicated it can be, how treacherous it can be, and the problems that can occur. That means that during the session next year, you will have people qualifying for House, Senate, school board, governor. All these races are up next year, which means that the session will be, I don't know where to say tinted or tainted by the election, but it will be. Now, what we found out this year is that the majority party likes to run out what we call, and they call, red meat issues. Red meat issues are things like restricting voting, restricting rights to certain groups, hot button issues that they think are simple that they can sell to the public. So if you can just imagine all of these critical issues coming forth, the election and reapportionment all occurring within the next, 7-8 months, then it's going to get pretty complicated in that time period. On top of that, to add to what Debbie said, we're probably in better position than ever before to encourage the governor to do what she should do to expand Medicaid. The problem with that is the election. And we've heard many times that her position, she's worried about some opposition coming forth that would criticize her. So we have the election standing in the way of, maybe standing in the way of Medicaid expansion. It's like everything else. It's easier to kick the ball down the road a little bit. So I guess that's what I need to say about how complicated it's going to get. Now, there may not be a gambling special. There may not be a prison special, although I cannot believe that there won't be. And there has to be a reapportionment special. Each special session at its fullest cost about $500,000. So that's where we are. It's going to be interesting. I would suspect that the legislature will loosen its guidelines related to COVID. I know that many of you, as you go out, you see fewer and fewer people wearing masks. You see more and more people who have either had COVID or had shots or had their vaccines. So I'm thinking that it's going to be more open next year, which means that all of us have an important role to play in contacting legislators on key issues and letting them know what's important to you and what's important to us and what's important to Alabama. So again, it didn't look so good in the past year, but it certainly looks like there's a lot of high hurdles in the year to come. So with that, I want to turn it over to Press to move us on to what we need to do.
Thank you, David. Actually, Debbie's going to help us. This is the time now. If you have questions, we're going to urge you to enter them in the chat. And Debbie's going to help facilitate getting those questions answered. I've seen a few come up already, and I'll just start with one of the earlier ones that I saw was a question related to civil asset forfeiture. And it was the question, I think for Deb, will ALEA be required to report data on civil asset forfeiture? So if you'll start with that one, and others, if you have questions, please enter them in the chat.
Yes, they are currently required to report civil asset forfeiture data, but they don't report some of the categories of data that we really need to see. One of the problems with the reporting requirements were that, well, ALEA didn't collect, collate, and send over in their reports data on the racial disparities in civil asset forfeiture. And we know from data in South Carolina, and South Carolina is actually our best demographic and a lot of times policy-wise comparator state, that there they employed civil asset forfeiture against Black people about 80% of the time. And Black people are not 80% of the population in South Carolina. There's a massive disparate impact of this policy. And that's actually one of the things that got Senator Orr so interested in reforming the practice in the first place. But they stonewalled him, and then he came back with a bill to basically eliminate it.
Thank you, Dev. I'm not sure who can answer this one, but somebody asked about the lawsuit, Alabama's lawsuit about the census data.
Yeah, I can take can you hear me? I can take a stab at that. That case is in federal court here in Alabama right now. And last month, the judges allowed, it's before a 3-judge panel, I think, and they allowed a number of states, I don't know, 15 or so states, to kind of sign on to express their endorsement of Alabama's claim. The crux of the matter is Alabama is challenging the way the census is planning to ensure the privacy of census respondents. It's a statistical method, and Alabama is saying, you know, they don't think it's appropriate or legal, and it's directly tied to the information that will be used to do the reapportionment that David was describing. So it's really connected to that process. There's probably going to be an expedited, I would think, or I understand that it's going to be kind of expedited. And once the 3-judge panel rules on it, any appeal could possibly go straight to the Supreme Court. So stay tuned on that one.
All right, thank you, Jim. And there's a question in the chat about, could you let us know the time frame for the calls to Governor Ivey on Thursday? I think on our Facebook event, we have that calls should be made between 9 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. Jim, is there a specific time frame?
I think 9 to 4:30 or something, or, you know, 5 is fine, but 9 to 4:30 is probably the official time. And thank you for that question. And let me just take the opportunity to emphasize courtesy. I know that Arise members are the most courteous people in the advocacy world, but I really want to emphasize courtesy when you're talking to the people in the governor's office who are going to become frustrated by mid-morning at how many calls they're getting. So, and also wear your thick skin. It's nothing personal if you get a rude or curt response from someone. Just take that as a sign that they're getting a lot of calls.
So maybe we want them to be rude. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked, was there any discussion on the Open Records Act?
That's one of the issues where, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Deb. You got it.
That's one of those issues where we are working to improve it. We're sort of getting the band back together in terms of coalition, kind of gathering up some of our coalition partners in that respect that we worked with a couple of years ago on it to try to move forward and implement the Open Records Act as it is, well, as the bill to improve it would do, specifically by putting some teeth behind enforcement provisions and providing some definite time on enforcement. So we are indeed working on the Open Records Act still.
Let me add a little insight to that. When we work on things like this, the biggest opposition comes from, I would hate to say it, but the bureaucracy. Open records has been stalled and is being stalled by governmental agencies. Driver's license, the concept of reforming the practice of taking driver's license on minor offenses, which is so damaging to people who work and don't have a lot of money. The biggest problem we face is the bureaucracy, which is the law enforcement community. So I just want to add that. It's odd that there are so many people in good faith who want to reform some of these things, but we are constantly opposed by the bureaucracy that exists. It's an interesting phenomenon, but most of the time it's either because they don't want to do the labor or they don't want to lose money. And so it's an odd thing that we have to face our own government to try to make reforms. And I'll leave it at that, Deb, unless you want to add anything else to that.
No, actually, I do. Just that a lot of those local agencies are feeling particularly squeezed because they haven't been adequately funded. That's really where a lot of that resistance comes from.
Okay, well, thank you guys. I appreciate you answering those questions. I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I think we're going to hand it over. Yes?
There was one, excuse me, Debbie, there was one question about the Open Meetings Act.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Deb, do you have any updates on?
No real updates on that. We haven't really tried to make any modifications to the Open Meetings Act so much. We've been focused on the records angle.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and hand it over to Stan to close us out tonight.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap it up. First of all, I want to thank everybody for participating, coming out. Also, for those who are not members, we want to offer you the opportunity to become a member of Arise. It is a great group of people that you'd be joining as a member, and you can do it right on the website. So if you're not a member, please join us. A couple of announcements. We're going to start listening sessions, and they're generally with member groups. So like I'll be doing one at Grace Episcopal in Tuscaloosa for those who live in Tuscaloosa. Might do another one at the UU Church there in Tuscaloosa. Doing one this Saturday at the Pavilion, one of the pavilions, I think it's Pavilion number 2 in Florence. So just check out our page and you'll see the announcement on listening sessions. Also, we're going to start in June Tuesday town halls, which basically will be larger sessions of folks being able to listen, for us to listen to what's on your mind. You will get a follow-up email about the town hall and info and a flyer. So look out for that. And in closing, we're going to do a brief survey. So please take the time to do the survey. It let us know just what's what. And there it is. It just popped up. Evaluation in progress. So with that, I want to thank you once again for coming out. And let's take this survey evaluation. And good night to all.